Italian market is centered on the corporate-based lending. It's totally different. And as Raffaele Rinaldi knows, last December, December 2015, the president, the chairman of ABI, Mr. Patuelli, signed the circular stressing the associates, the bank associates, to share preventively the disposal of credit in shipping market to basing it on the agreement, a preventive agreement with the ship owner. Is a very relevant point, is a pillar in the relation between the Italian ship owners and the Italian banks. So I mean that the relation of two parties in our market is totally different if compared to the other markets. And for this, I want to ask to contribute to the panel ship owners. Let me give the word before to ship owners, and if you agree, Mario, Giuseppe, and Yannis, I include you in the ship owners. You are everywhere. You have a wide experiences to give the word. Yes, my priority to Francesca is our lovely lady, and to get your view about the relation as the relation changed across last years between the banks, Italian banks, and Italian ship owners. It's very interesting to get it because it's the base to hear the opinion of Raffaele, which represents the industry and not the opposite parts, but our partner, and Roberto Ippolito, because I am very interested in the view of Roberto about our industry, because you represent the future, the expectation. I centered my presentation introducing the private debt like the big opportunity for shipping funding. And I am very, very, very interested to get your independent view. Okay. So don't worry, the ship owners are quiet people, are calm people, they are not nervous. Don't worry for the reactions. Okay, Francesca, please, the microphone for you.
Thank you, Fabrizio. I mean, the question, where I see banks, or maybe just I can refer to our relationship with our banks, with our Italian banks. I mean, we are a traditional Italian shipping company, and we're still a healthy company today. We focused on niche market, both because we invest in first in MR tankers, ice class 1A.
I am very happy because you use the ship that brings the name of my wife, Rosita. It's chartered out to Francesca.
Yes, since a couple of years, I think, yes. So then our strategy of investments was in the niche market and as MR ice class, and also for sea river tankers in Russia, but also we were able to have banks sitting next to us, following our ventures and our ideas. So the banks that I'm referring to are mainly the Italian banks with whom we have a very close relationship. Why we have this close relationship with them? Because we based our dialogue on transparency, on mutual respect and trust. where our reputation was a first priority for us and for them. So we believe that these factors were of key importance in order to establish this good and long-lasting relationship. As was said, basically the banks were was hit by the crisis in general, but also by the performance of some operators that basically give them a lack of trust of the entire sector. So I want to be positive and think that it is important to build again a very good relationship with the banks based on reputation, based on trust, based on a mutual respect, where they will then have a more cooperative approach towards our business, and so they will focus on more reliable owners. They will focus on they will be more selective. They will be more prudent. But maybe this will lead to have again banks trust the sector and be again in the market always sitting next to owners. Even now we see sometimes some international banks thinking to speak with reliable owners in order to see what's going on, if they can be of any help for their investments.
Francesca, it's a good point. Raffaele Rinaldi. Francesca stressed the human factor. So it seems, and it looks like, that human factors is bringing a huge contribute to overcome the reciprocal crisis. Because as I said frequently during the board of Confitarma, we can understand the banks because they are living a crisis, probably worse crisis than shipping industry. And the human factor is relevant. You know that we, among us and during our meeting of Tavolo Tecnico, the internal countering between ABI and Confitarma, we are stressing the fact that our scope is to preserve the know-how of our industry. How you assess the words of Francesca is a good sound for you, I think.
Yes, Fabrizio, thank you for the question. Thanks to the organizer for the invitation to take part in this panel. I think that over the last years, the banking industry went through a different crisis and learned many lessons. Actually, the banking industry experienced a funding crisis, a credit risk crisis, and a capital shortage crisis. Following the funding crisis, the Italian banking system, following the funding crisis, a new trend emerged that is going to last for a long period. The collateralized instruments, financial instruments, are becoming more and more important in the funding strategies of banks. The Italian collateralized instruments is the cover bond and is called the Obbligazione Bancaria Garantita. Our cover bond cannot be collateralized by ships. I think that this is a point that we have to make with our treasury, with our monetary authority, because I believe that if Italian banks could use ship loans as collateral of obbligazione bancaria garantita, they could have a better funding condition, and ship owners could have better credit access. So this is the first point, and then I want to come to your answer. In addition to this, I want to remind that a few years ago, the Italian Parliament passed an important law which introduced in Italy the so-called obbligazione bancaria collateralizzata, that is a security with similar characteristic as a covered bond, but this security can be collateralized by a wider range of assets, such as small and medium enterprises, small and medium enterprises loan, or by ship loans. Unfortunately, the Ministry, the Treasury, hasn't passed the regulation that would allow Italian banks to issue this security. This is another important point that we have to make with our monetary authorities. I say we, in the sense the Italian Banking Association and Confitarma. Coming to the question you made, I mean, over the last years, we experienced increase of the credit risk. The level of probability default dramatically increased. This means that banks needs to be more cautious and more selective in lending new money. But collaterals can help banks to originate new loans, because collaterals can reduce the loss given default. For this reason, I believe that Italian banks needs to be more specialized in the shipping sector or in other sector, because it's not important. I mean, it's becoming more and more important to evaluate the quality and marketability of the collateral. So it's not useful to assess the quality of the corporate, but it's important to assess the quality of the collateral. And this is true, especially true in the shipping sector, because I mean, a shipping mortgage is a wonderful collateral as long as you understand its quality and its marketability. Another point that is important is that so far Basel do not recognize shipping mortgage as an instrument for the risk mitigation. I believe that shipping mortgage is as sound as a commercial real estate mortgage. And for this reason, ship loans should be treated as commercial real estate loans in terms of capital requirements. We are working with Confitarma on this. I think that we produce important evidence about this fact. We had a dialogue with the European Commission about this point. The Italian Banking Association is willing to cooperate with Confitarma and the European ship owners in order to provide other evidence that the mortgage the shipping mortgage is as sound as a commercial real estate. So I think that the Italian banking system, have to strengthen its cooperation with Confitarma, and I am sure that in our case the human factor can be an asset for this.
Thank you, Raffaele. And was very interesting, and it's good that the whole community heard your words. Just last week we held a private hearing at the European Commission, DG FISMA, to state our requests and respect the Basel II rules review.
May I ask a question to Mr. Ippolito? Would like to have some information about private debt. To what extent private debt can be a good substitute for bank debt or for private equity?
So very quickly, I give you a few figures and then this should help answer the question. Overall, from the peak of 2011 until the end of 2015, bank lending to the Italian economy has decreased 100 billion. Of this 100, I guess roughly 15 or so is decreased to the shipping sector. The largest component of decrease is real estate. So 100 billion lost. We don't know if they will come back. Private debt, dry powder, i.e. how much money private debt industry is managing in Italian funds, of which I represent one, but also the other two who left. There is roughly 1 billion. Then there is an additional 4 billion in Europe dedicated to Italy. So in total is 5 billion of private debt available for the Italian economy, which is supposed to plug the 100 million. So I don't want to disappoint the audience, but it looks like more than at least now an alternative to bank lending, we are a complement to bank lending. Going forward, if we look at the growth of this asset class in the investor pocket, if we look at the US, which is a much more developed market, this hole can be definitely plugged by private debt. Why I believe that private debt is probably, or hybrid capital better, is a better fit for shipping than private equity. First of all, ship owners and in general shipping industry is very used to a dialogue with lenders, which is something you should not underestimate, because when I speak to Italian companies in another sector, they are very used to short-term lending, to very specific forms of lending, but not highly sophisticated from a financial standpoint. Second, as I understand it, shipping is a business, is a family business, i.e. is for generation. And private equity is more there for a quick hit. So there is clearly a time mismatch. So it's, to me at least, no surprise that it didn't work and it was unsatisfactory for both sides, I guess, for the private equity fund and for the ship owners.
Sorry, what's the typical maturity for a private debt issue?
And here, yeah, this is a very good point, because the typical maturity is 7 years for private debt, and this is why also, and I'm looking to Fabrizio, I'm taking the provocation. Probably it's time also for this audience to think to a dedicated private debt fund, to industry-dedicated private debt fund, because the typical maturity of a private debt fund is probably a bit short for the needs of the industry. And if you think instead of more of a kind of infrastructure tenor of a fund, which is more in 10, 15 years, then it's something which could be more appealing to the industry. This goes also on the, goes to probably a point which was raised, which is investors. Who are the investors in the asset class? It's patient money. So it is pension funds, casse previdenziali, insurance company, which clearly they don't want to every 2 years have a problem of selecting a new fund. If they're happy with a fund which pays a coupon every year, which is higher than the BOT or BTP, everybody's happy. So I think in this sense, private debt can be a very interesting answer. It's probably not as ready as the businessmen in this room would like to, but I think that time are mature and speed is there for everyone.
Is it good hear from you these words, because you confirm that the private debt particularly fits with the shipping. The shipping needs to get patient capital and flexible capital. The two features are perfectly matched by private debt. And the investors which looks to invest in private equity, they are usually stable investors, insurance company, pension fund, and so on. It's interesting now to get the opinion of Giuseppe and Mario in order to learn their experience and their view, their angle about the relation with Italian banks. We share the same view about the strategic need to preserve the Italian know-how, in the shipping. Our companies own huge knowledge, and probably private debt, hearing the comment of Roberto, is perfectly adapt to combine these needs. What is your comment about Giuseppe and Mario?
Thank you, Fabrizio. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I would like also to thank Francesco for inviting me to participate this panel. And I would like to start my my thought from something very interesting that I heard yesterday participating at the Italian Shipowners Association public meeting held in Rome. And there was a very interesting speech from the new president of the Italian entrepreneurs, talking about a changing model that is urgently needed in the European financing system, to look into the ratio expressed from the brain of the entrepreneur. So banks must give more value to the, let's say, unperceivable asset, rather than intangible asset, rather than the material asset. And I think this is the...
Mr. Boccia.
Yeah, Mr. Boccia said that, yes. Yes. And I think this is really, really important, and I think this will be the key of the future, because we can talk about non-performing loan, we can talk about ratios, collateral, I think are all very important elements, but the key element is that we run into a new era where the volatility is the stable, let's say, topic of the business, and companies must really structure themselves to go through this new model. And in the case of the shipowning industry, especially the Italian shipowners, where my experience is coming from, I'm the 6th generation in this business. My grandfather was used to the physical world war. Today, my generation is used to the financial war. And I think, to go through this phenomenon, really the Italian, like I think in general the European shipowning companies that are mostly family-run companies needs to find the right financial partner that is looking into the capability of the entrepreneur and can, let's say, escort the entrepreneur through the generations and through, the life. I give you a few examples. Now, I think that we are going very much closer to a rapidly changing system in the shipowning industry, especially for the technological mutations. Today, there were very interesting speech, but I would say that we will see more and more the concept of fleet renewal. The life cycle of a ship will be short and short. So therefore, finding the right financial partner that understand perfectly, the business is very, very important. And I think the value that has to be given mostly to the capability of the companies and of the entrepreneurs, of the work team, how they will follow the frontier of the business. I think this is the key point. What is my experience of the Italian banking system? I always think that the Italian banking system, the banks that are really sane, the banks that are, went through the financial crisis and were able to manage it, I think they will be there, and they still give a value to the tradition of companies and to the capability of the entrepreneurs. If the game becomes different, which is how I can recover from a number, so then I think it's totally alterated, and there is not a long-term view. Thank you.
As I said, Martin Stopford, we stay here, Mario, we stay here.
I mean, I thank everybody, but I take very short, otherwise it's a little bit late. I had some notes here. First of all is what happened to my banker is the title. I'd like to say what will happen to my shipowner, because after what we have heard up to now, especially in the previous, but also now, there's been a complete change of skin of the shipowners, or at least it is pretended that there will be a complete change of skin in the shipowners, because as also Giuseppe was saying, the excess of exposure to finance is a very difficult thing in the last years. At the same time, we have heard before a very interesting speech about the importance of training, the importance of crew, the importance of what should be the heart of the organization of a shipowner. And unfortunately, to a certain extent, this has gone a little bit far, a little bit behind this matter about finance. Now everybody is talking about finance, and everybody is talking about the possibility of what is the best way or the best agreement to find with the system, with the banking system. Banks have not changed in the names, because the same names are there, but banks have changed completely in terms of attitude towards especially the ship owners. In the past, ship owners, as many other categories, were dealing with what was called the commercial part of the bank, that was understanding the business in terms of what has been said, the length of the cycle, the age of a ship, what means to be capital intensive. Probably there has been an excess of finance within shipping in the past years and an excess of leverage that has caused some of the problems. But these problems have caught also ship owners that were behaving in a traditional way, in a traditional lending way of the past, that was equity to put in the investment of around 30 to 35%, and the rest was banking debt. It was banking debt in the form of normally it was considered to be a 12 or eventually a 15-year loan with a balloon for an 18-year profile, because the ship was lasting 25 years, and if the cycles were such that you could eventually repay earlier, fine, but otherwise it was given the possibility to run the investment and to look to what was considered to be the most important part and what was considered to be the, let's say, the medal for the ship owners, that was the technical management in its broader terms, namely crewing, namely technical, and so on. Now things have changed. It is also the changing of the scheme, but I have to say that also before there has been a change, in the sense that if one with the white hair remembers the old contracts of financing with the banks, were typically what we say were pre-printed forms of maybe 10 pages in which you just had to put a signature on top. This was the Italian side. Nothing with the English or the Anglo-Saxon way, and it was also because the banks were considering shipping in a slightly different way. Then we become with huge contracts, and you had to become a sort of lawyer expert because I was pretending that you had to understand everything was written in the contract. That was almost impossible. And nowadays, the difference is that you are dealing with people that is less linked to the commercial side and is more linked to the recovery side, with a yet much shorter way to recover. And this, combined with all the things that have happened, like derivatives, and like every financing, every loan was linked with several other things together that have caused huge problems, but high commission to the banks, then fine, this has created a big loss. The experience, to conclude, with Italian banks towards foreign banks is slightly different, in the sense that at the end, even if it has changed the attitude and it has changed the scheme, as I was saying, and we are dealing more with the restructuring rather than with the commercial part of the bank, Italian banks are, at least with the Italian ship owners, more comprehensive. They are more, in a certain, I don't want to say more good, but they are tending to fix the possibility of recovering. To a certain extent, it was cited before by Fabrizio, the example of the Royal Bank of Scotland that has completely closed its shipping desk, that has been impossible to make any deal, and the bank has taken on board a huge loss on many of the transactions that have been done, because probably the philosophy was changed such dramatically that it was impossible eventually to have any other way of dialogue with that bank, but also with Commerzbank and others. So at the end, that's not bad, the Italian system overall, even with all its complexity. Thank you.
Mario, and if we review back, it seems to be passed a long time since Lambros Varnavides visited our offices in Italy. And so my opinion, I share your view, but my opinion is this. Is that the way to do bank in the shipping changed when the model was reviewed, when there was allowed to the retail bank to do specialized lending. They splashed out a lot of money in the market without sense. Anyway, we close involving our last three panelists, last but not least, as we say, as Francesco Moneta, Yannis Trifillis, and Pierluigi Zagari, on recalling the opening of the panel session when Michele Autori delivered his presentation speaking about NPL. But my question is, what means NPL in Italian market? Standing the point of view of Mario and Giuseppe, is my view that we have not NPL in Italy, but we have sometimes stressed loan. So considering the legal framework, considering the approach of Italian banks, I am interested to get your view in respect to this topic. How do you think that the bank will manage in the future, in next future, the stressed loan? I like to name this asset class as stressed loan and not non-performing loan. Please, Francesco, Pierluigi, and Yannis. Yannis can also contribute to the international experience.
Definition of NPL has been made before. Literally, it's any debt position or any credit position which is not performing for several reasons. It could be a lack of payment on capital, lack of payment of interest, any shortfall on tenor. You cannot. I mean, you should go further on details on every single position. But having said that, the overall shipping loan market in Italy is in 2015 was 12 billion euros. Among the 12 billion euros, 5 billion euros are NPL. It could be working capital facilities, could be asset-based debt, could be pre-settlement exposure or pre-settlement risk. I mean, so all the credit facilities set up for derivatives.
Actually to be paid, say the classification of Banca d'Italia and the EBA.
But the classification of Banca d'Italia and EBA, they split in Italy in four categories. The two extreme is, the first one is in simple words, is a situation where you will not get your money back from a bank point of view. The other extreme is a contingency limited to time. I mean, you could need 2 or 3 years to solve the contingency. It means the contingency will not be a contingency anymore, and the effect on the bank's P&L is totally different from the first one, which is a pure write-off. The peculiarity of the Italian market is that, ironically, the weight of the shipping NPL is quite small. We are talking about 3.4% of the whole NPL outstanding. The other peculiarity of the Italian market is that no one service provider exists specialized on shipping NPL. Means lack of contingency statistics, lack of deal, and plus, in the meantime, they introduce through the law 130 the securitization structure for the NPL. The lack of servicing provider means that now banks and ship owners are experiencing a stalemate situation. The ship owner is acting as the service provider of the bank, which is holding the defaulted position or nearly defaulted position originated by the ship owner. Through the introduction of the securitization structure, I'm seeing in the near future financial engineering structure, which is the securitization one. The first example is going to be the Fondo Atlante taking over 26 billion euros of NPL of Monte dei Paschi. The second one will be an own-made securitization structure set up by UniCredit, most probably for 20 billion euros, on the same model of the Atlante one, but built up internally. What does it mean? Means that the ship owners in an NPL situation, they will face the service provider appointed by the securitization structure, or will face the service provider or the advisors appointed by the bank to manage the single situation related to a restructuring process. It's better to clear up. Means one thing is the NPL sold it to anyone, to a third party. Another is the credit or debit position under any restructuring process, under any of the dedicated or specific law needed from the bankruptcy ones till the Italian way of Chapter 11. I mean, there are two different markets, two different situations. What's unfortunately for the ship owners, that's not only they will to face in the near future the banker, they will to face the service provider, and they will have to face the bank's advisor appointed to manage the nearly defaulted situation.
Thank you. Please, no, thanks, Pierluigi, for the contribute, and you stressed the need to call on board the right service provider.
But if you think about it, is exactly what happened in 2008. 2008, the problem experienced by the credit market in the US, in particular by the subprime, yes. The contingency has been created by building up debts on paper. I mean, they lost, at a certain point, they lost the underlying. And the most ironic thing is that the more the high yield, the higher was the rating. It is quite the same with the law 130 in the securitization. I mean, I struggling and consider to securitize a debt rather than an asset. I always learned that securitization was asset-based securitization, mortgage-based securitization, but not defaulted position securitization, where basically you raise your money on the market to buy something which is defaulted, and then you have to get the money back.
Francesco and Yannis, I learned by the words of Pierluigi that the specialization is almost crucial in the crisis, and probably more crucial in the crisis than in the good times. I understood well, or you share this view?
No, I mean, I completely share your view. I'm going to be
view of advising.
Very, very brief. Of course, the NPL represents a big issue for the sector and for Italy as well. I'm more concerned of what next after the NPL will somehow be managed. Refinancing risk will be there in 3-4 years' time. Banks are more selective, are still there, will be there, but are for sure more selective. bond issuance is not really a solution to the industry because of the size of the Italian shipping companies. Private equity is a sort of question mark with unclear outcomes so far. Private debt can be the solution. It's a shame that Roberto, Andrea, and Stefano had to leave the room because the real question is the private debt solution applicable to all ship owners, to all projects, to refinancing, to new investments? This is, my biggest question mark, because for sure there's a sort of funding gap that has to be covered in a way or the other. Private debt can be a solution, maybe not only.
For the future and starting for the concept that worthy ship owners, worthy project, worthy funds. Please, Yannis.
Fabrizio, I'm very conscious of Francesco's presence here, both audially as well as physically. So I just be very, very brief and offer something maybe appropriate to end this panel. To the question where the banker went is a good question. Normally, we talked previously about a broken clock. One of my grandfathers used to say...
The battery are offloaded, the battery. We have to change the batteries.
One of my grandfathers used to say that a broken clock can still tell the correct time twice a day. Now, clearly here, these banks are not telling the correct time any time of day. So they are not a broken clock. So I would say they are basically non-existing anymore. And this is the only piece of evidence that I can contribute to the debate. This is an artist's depiction of a rare universal phenomenon. It's two black holes colliding and feeding off one another. We can take the metaphor to be the black holes of the financial system and the state system, or the black hole of the bad loans and the future capital needs after Basel IV. Now, the combination of these two black holes, the one is, I think, has the gravitational pull of mass of 27 suns, and the other has the gravitational pull of 30 suns. But when they collide, the end black hole does not have the sum of the two suns, it has less. Because during the last 1/5 of a second, so much energy is released through this collision that it equates to about 50 times the average amount of energy emitted in the universe at any given moment. So obviously what you can see is that extreme events create extreme fallouts. In this case, the fallouts are magnetic waves that are then studied, etc., etc. They actually disproved Einstein's theory comparing what he expected with what actually happened with a 100-year gap. Now, all I'm saying is that the banks aren't there. They collapsed under their own weight, the weight of the inverted pyramid that we saw earlier, and the inverted pyramid that we saw earlier in a comparison of Euclidean with quantum physics is nothing else than the weight of derivatives versus physical assets. And I think, I may be very simplistic, but I think that the solution is not to add more derivatives and to add more distance from the asset. I think the solution is to come back to the asset where the intrinsic value is. So my advice to the banks, and as the universe keeps on, so does human commerce, my advice to the banks is don't get so carried away with trying to control risks through mathematics. Even the most accomplished mathematician, Einstein, was wrong when he tried to imagine what happens in a black hole. So don't play with things you don't understand. People don't understand derivatives. They were called weapons of mass destruction by the gurus of the market, Buffett and Soros. In the past, they proved how correct they were. So go back to basics. Of course, look at the person you're lending to. Don't look just at the balance sheet. We heard how you can mess with balance sheets, how you can tweak the EBITDA, how you can do all of these things. So focus on the essence of what's going on. This is a bit theoretical, but I'm tired of too many definitions, because the more clearly defined something is, the easier it is to manipulate it.
And you?
Bravo. An older Italian banker, still alive, still active, at the head of one of the relevant Italian banking group, said to me 30 years ago, Fabrizio, the best way to do credit, to do lending, is to see your counterparty in the eyes.
Thank you, thank you, Fabrizio.
Thank you. Thank you to the audience and to all the panelists and the speakers. We are trying to do our best to match challenging subject with a decent time schedule.